news. Tickets for the Conference on Religious Trauma, Court 2023, are now available. Also, if you're interested in an ad-free version of the Divorcing Religion podcast, come join me over on Patreon. Links for both are in the show notes. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. My guest today is Marie Lerch, my friend from social media. We only live a few hours apart, which in Canada makes us neighbors. I started following Marie when she made posts about her own deconstruction while remaining married to a pastor. Marie was raised by her grandmother until age 13, at which point she entered Canada's foster care system. After 3 years in foster care, she met her husband, and they've now been married 27 years. Another interesting piece of Marie's journey is that she and her husband almost became Jehovah's Witnesses, but instead they turned to evangelical Christianity. She started deconstructing about 10 years ago, but when Trump was elected in the USA, she completed her deconstruction from Christianity, and you are not alone in having done that. Now, Marie runs Love Maven Life Coaching, where she uses the internal family systems technique to bring healing and internal peace to her clients. Welcome, my friend. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Janice. It's really good to be here today.
And we are just about neighbors.
Pretty much. It really is just a few hours, a hop, skip, and a jump away.
I like it. Thanks for joining me. And I know people who are watching and listening, they're going to really resonate with some different aspects of your story because we have such a wide variety of folks who tune in for this podcast. I wonder, would you start us off telling a little bit about what it was like growing up for you? Most of us aren't raised by grandparents and then enter the foster care system. So what was all that about? And what was it like for you?
Yeah. I was raised by my Doukhobor grandma till I was about 13 when she died of breast cancer. My childhood, that's a whole story in itself. But my grandma was a lovely lady, best borscht maker on the planet.
Yay, borscht.
But, yeah. But she was a very busy lady, and I had a really lonely childhood. I didn't have a lot of connection with my parents. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom, I didn't live with my mom. She lived far away. So most of my childhood was actually quite lonely. There was lots of neglect, lots of no attachment forming, very traumatic in some ways. And so as an adult, I've been having to work through a lot of that. But the Russian community in the area is a beautiful community, and they're very spiritual. And growing up as a kid in that, I had no clue. I was just kind of a tag along to everything. Somebody that people just had to take care of. So I got to experience a lot of it without understanding it till mostly just recently, actually. Understanding the breadth and depth of how their beliefs really shape them. And so, in some ways, I'm really grateful for that perspective now.
And can you actually tell us a little bit? I'm sure that probably some of our American friends perhaps aren't familiar or haven't heard of the Doukhobor religion. And of course, you're in British Columbia, you're in the West Kootenays. So to us, we're familiar with hearing about it, but please share with our audience.
Yeah, so the Doukhobors were pacifists that left Russia. And because they refused to go to war, they refused to fight. So they left Russia and emigrated to Canada. And then there was some offshoots from that. But so that's where my family comes from. There's a long line of spiritual sense in that group, singing, just like in churches, singing is a really big deal. It's like the way they really connect with who they are as people of faith. Their motto it was toil and peaceful life. So they just wanted to live on the land, live quiet lives. The protesting aspect of it, about protesting more, wasn't really that quiet. So it's a very colorful community.
Right. And when I think of the Doukhobors and the protesting in the 60s and 70s, I think of the Sons of Freedom in particular. Yep. So that's something that our viewers can look up if they would like to find out more about that. And my understanding is that connection to the land also made up an important aspect of Doukhobor spirituality. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. Like, I wouldn't consider myself a good knowledge base of the Doukhobors, because there's lots that I'm missing about it. But yeah, that connection to the land and the kind of a hippie, holistic lifestyle was just about getting back to simpler life and being connected with the circle of life. Yeah. They would always say that we're not humans experiencing a spiritual life, we're spiritual beings experiencing human existence. And so that's the kind of community they are.
Okay. And so that was the tradition kind of that you were born into ethnically, say, and then you were raised by your grandma until unfortunately she passed when you were still quite young. And then you needed care. And so you entered the Canadian foster care community, which certainly has good points and very difficult points as well.
Yeah. And ironically, that was where my first experience of evangelicalism happened. Was my first foster home. She was very evangelical, and a couple of the girls there were also very evangelical, girls like my age. And I remember one night, I had only been there. It was supposed to be an emergency home just for like a few weeks. And I ended up staying in that place for almost a year, I think. Lots of kids coming and going. But anyway, so we one night sat down for like a prayer session and found out I was full of demons and I had so much darkness. And I had to get rid of, I had a special ring my auntie gave me. It happens to be black onyx, and they made me get rid of that. And I was like, that was my first experience of okay, I've never heard of this, but I'm living here now. So I guess this is what we do.
Wow.
And she had a rule. You were supposed to go to church once a month. And I managed to skirt that a little bit. I didn't really attend her church that much, thankfully.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's so painful.
The holy rollers.
And so you stayed with them for a year. It sounds so to go from home to home when you've already come out of a situation with challenging attachment, at best. It seems like it would just kind of add to everything to then have to go from one place to another. What was the next place like? Do you have any recollection of that?
Yeah. So it was an older couple that lived on a farm in Crescent Valley. Their name was Joe and Sylvia. They're both passed on now. And Joe was just a real stern cowboy, and Sylvia was a good girl, and they were just the cutest couple ever. And it was a really good home, actually. It was a really good space. Nice. Very traditional in a lot of ways. But, Joe liked his glass of whiskey every night, and he had a lot of good jokes. And, but it was a lonely place. Again, older people, for someone who didn't know about attachment then, I was very reticent to form any attachments.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like, because attachment hurt, because there were hardly ever any in my entire life. And the main one that I had, the only one that mattered, my grandma had passed away. So there was a lot of healing that I had to go through to be able to understand the importance of mental health and like your personal journey of healing. And that never began until I discovered IFS. So I spent years and years and years in church. We always talked about healing. We always talked about, letting things go, letting God come in and heal you. And that was never a space I found that in. And I suspect that was because I was a pastor's wife. So that's a whole nother level of existing in a faith community. But when I discovered IFS, and that's where I found my healing. That's where my self and my internal connections began.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So I'm very excited to hear about your IFS work. And I also am really curious to know about you meeting your husband. And so you were still in your teens when you met? Was he in foster care as well?
No, he had a wonderful family out in the valley. We're high school sweethearts. I just remember noticing him in the hallway one day and saying, I want that one. And so yeah, we met in high school. We started dating in like, we originally started dating in like grade 8 and then like split up for a while because my mental health was really poor. And then we started again at the end of grade 9, and I moved in by the middle of grade 10, I think. I moved in with him and his family, grade 11, I think. And it was just, they became family right away. And yeah.
And were they religious?
Yes and no. Like, his mom was very New Age. So, like, they had spiritual beliefs, yes, but they weren't the kind of people that like put it up into your face all the time. Yeah.
Nice. Wow. And so, you were in love with this boy. You've been, going together for a while in high school, and then how beautiful that his family would open their doors to you, recognizing that, wow, this young person needs family, and we are the closest thing to her now, as family can be. And so you were together then, even as you were living with them. When did you guys kind of look into Jehovah's Witness? What happened there? Yeah. What made you even consider that?
So we graduated high school, moved out, then eventually made our way to Nelson. And Jesse was a mechanic at his dad's mechanic shop. His dad was a mechanic, the organic mechanic. And my husband has officially taken that over now and does that part-time. Anyway, so one day at home, when I wasn't at work, a couple of JWs came by, knocked on the door, and just started chit-chatting. And then they just know how to ask the right questions. Like, they just really know how to find like the cracks, right? And so somehow the mention of my grandma came up. And so this is an interesting point where there's trauma in your past that isn't healed. They're going to people like that are going to pick up on it and use that to their benefit. And so I had so much trauma to unpack about the death of my grandmother that was the issue that they got their foot in the door. Well, don't you want to know where she is? Don't you want to know if you can see her again? Those were the little literal questions they asked me. And that's how it began. And then I started studying with them twice a week, like 2 full evenings a week. And then not long after, my husband joined. And we spent a solid year, like studying twice a week, going to the Kingdom Hall. It got to the point where we were ready to say to like his family, like, I think we can't do Christmas anymore. We're going to get baptized. Like we were that close
Wow.
to,
Wow.
to becoming JWs. And then we just happened to invite a neighbor over who was into this network marketing thing.
Oh, God.
And so the story is just hilarious. And so this neighbor is Roman Catholic, and we invited them over. And then I was just so like pleased that we were becoming more spiritual that I mentioned that we're studying with JWs. I just like freaked out. I remember feeling like a nuclear bomb went off. Like, what? Like, your soul is in danger, and we're so afraid for you. And which was really cool. I mean, so cool of them. Like, we still know them to this day. And so they got us in touch with this lady named Lori McGregor, who she's also passed on now, but who was a JW for like 30 years or something like that. And then she had a counter cult ministry for people coming out of cults. And so it had just happened that Lori McGregor lived in Nelson, and then we became friends with her, and she was the evangelical who really brought us in under the banner.
Wow. So, some folks might say saved from one cult to enter another. Very, very interesting. And I can say, certainly in the work that I do with former Jehovah's Witness, boy, those kids go through a lot of suffering. It is a very, very difficult organization to be a part of. So I'm glad that you were spared that. And you made such an excellent point about trauma, unhealed trauma, leaving us vulnerable. And I wonder too, even if the first foster home that you were in for almost a year, and they were quite evangelical, and even that left you vulnerable, because there were things that happened in that home and questions that came up for you. And again, people that seemed to know the answer were very confident that they knew the answer. So, boy, oh boy. And then you were fortunate to be introduced to Lori, who could tell you, no, you don't want to be a part of them. But here's what you really want to be a part of. It's all like multi-level marketing. It's all, oh my gosh. Wow. So then you started attending an evangelical church. But I have to ask, did you also get involved in the multi-level marketing scheme that your neighbors?
Oh, yeah. No, we didn't. Not the one. We had our own. We were into one called Nikan, magnets. And so we were like comparing each other's business kind of thing. And I have to say that, so like when we started going to church, then we could see multi-level marketing was like, ooh, all of your friends become prospects. That doesn't feel very good anymore. Like it doesn't, we could start to see how MLM basically uses your connections and people. And then, now later on down the road, you can see how church does the same thing.
Yeah. It's true. And even people who are not regular churchgoers, not evangelical or any other religious denomination, a lot of folks involved in the health and wellness industry also get sucked right into multi-level marketing schemes and scams, and with the same disastrous results. So it's all points of vulnerability for us. So very interesting. So now, if you don't mind, we'll get back to a little more of the religious aspect of things then. So what was it like then when you and Jesse started attending? Well, did his parents have anything to say when you were looking into JWs and then, going whole hog onto the evangelical scene?
Yes and no. Like we didn't really tell them we were studying with JWs. That we kind of kept that on the down a little bit. But when we became evangelicals, his mom became I wouldn't say upset, but it really put a wedge between us, like, and not because of her, but because of us, because of these new beliefs that how we were being taught, like, set us apart, set us as somehow better. And now we have the truth. We have, like, that very narcissistic, really, bent to it. And so me and her would have a lot of discussions about, like, just how we view the world. And man, I was a good evangelical, and I feel really bad. I studied that Bible from the Greek interlinear, like, comparing. I don't know Greek or Hebrew at all, but I could look, and, like, Lori taught me how to compare certain things, and then I could compare, like, the different translate. Oh, this one says this one says this, and I knew the scriptures to shoot back at his mom. Like, it wasn't nice. And that is one of my biggest regrets in life, actually, is that my evangelical faith really stole a lot of years away from the relationship I had with my mother-in-law, because it became more not butting heads, but not understanding, and me not being able to listen anymore. And that is a tragedy.
Wow, that's so painful, and such an earnest admission on your fault. And boy, I am right there with you. And just the feeling of having the secret sauce. My Mennonite group, we had the secret sauce. Yep. We were the true holy ones, and so then I remember at one point, someone from the past, from way in the old days, an old friend of my ex-husband's, contacted us and invited us. She was getting married, and wouldn't we like to come? And I was so rude. I really told her, well, we don't believe that you can marry again. We don't believe in divorce, and what you're doing is wrong. And I felt so righteous, so self-righteous in doing that. And now I just think, I had the opportunity to encourage somebody and celebrate their new happiness. And I absolutely just stomped on it. And that's, that is part of the regret as we mature and we're looking backwards and see how we would do things differently now if we were presented with the same opportunities. So, boy, I feel ya. That's the truth. Yeah. So you did maintain ties with Jesse's family, but they just weren't as close as they could have been. There was that wedge there that you talked about. At what point did he ever then go to a Bible college to become a pastor? No, he didn't. So the first church we went to, and the only one we stayed in, was the Evangelical Covenant Church in Nelson, BC. And Jesse, my husband is an amazing person. Like, he is so competent in, seems like almost every area of life, that he just started serving in the church right away. Like, I started serving in the youth group right away. And so they created a mentorship program specifically so he could serve next to the pastor, to see if he wanted to, like, try it out, kind of thing, see if he wanted to do that. And he loved it. And so he started doing online school. And then he would do, like, the mentoring aspect next to the pastor in the church. So, man, and then he was still mechanicking full time. Those were so busy. Those years were so busy. And then kids came along. Yeah. And then kids came along. We tried to have kids for a while, actually. And for whatever reason, we couldn't. And I decided to go back to school. I decided to go back to school, actually. And literally that month I got pregnant. And so I was like, is this a joke? Like, what happened? But maybe my body just needed to release the stress of the need, or I don't know. But yeah, and then kids came along, and
And I became that stay-at-home mom. I loved being a stay-at-home mom.
Me
Like,
too.
that's all I wanted to be growing up, even, was just a stay-at-home mom. Um, and so, yeah, so a pastor's wife and stay-at-home mom, that was still a very busy life. Yeah.
Hmm. Yes. And so in the church, there's community there, but it's more than just community, because you've
Hmm.
embraced this idea that there's a loving, all-powerful, omniscient father figure out there who really cares about you, but who also could cast you into hell if you look at him the wrong way, if you fail to do whatever. So there's
Yeah.
tension there that a lot of people who are still religious, they don't like to address that or look at.
Hmm.
But so for you, then I imagine now, and then you have kids, you're married, you have kids of your own, you're learning about mothering, about being a mother.
Hmm.
And you also have this group that embraces you as someone who
Hmm.
adheres to the same beliefs that they do. And
Yeah.
that all feels pretty good when you've been basically in a desert, if as a person has been starved for
Yeah.
healthy attachment.
Yeah, totally. It felt like, in many ways, that I had those attachments. But I didn't realize at the time that they were quite superficial in a lot of ways. And if your beliefs changed, or if you thought something different, that put strain on those attachments. And
Yeah.
that did happen with a friend of mine, that she was a really good friend, and they were very fundamentalist. And, there's some things I just couldn't do. Like, I always let my kids do Halloween. It's just, why would I take that away? Like, as an adult, I would love to go and dress up and go door to door and get candy. So why can't my kids do that? Like, I had to wrestle through all that kind of stuff, to see if this is okay. And I guess maybe that was the beginning of what might be called deconstruction. I'm not sure. Or maybe that's just my rebelliousness of, I've always had to figure it out myself, and I've always had to do it my way. So I'm going to keep doing that.
Right. And you weren't indoctrinated in childhood. You weren't
No.
indoctrinated in childhood into this belief system that said
Right.
you mustn't ever allow your children to participate in something as evil and wicked and sinful as Halloween, because you grew up with like, hey,
Yeah.
Halloween's fun. It's a good time.
Right.
So
Right.
why should
Yeah.
I force that on my kids and deny them to have that fun?
And even in music. So when we first became Christians, I got rid of all my music. Like, I love music. It's like music is my life. I got rid of all my music, all my books, all my Stephen King books, because they were all evil, right? And there was a good solid 10 years where I didn't listen to any secular music. Now it feels like this black in my life where I have to go back and oh yeah, what was that band again? So when I started loosening up in my faith, I went back to my old music, like Aerosmith, AC/DC, Bon Jovi, Led Zeppelin. And I started playing that music again. And my kids were preteen, early teen. I remember, so my kids went to a private Christian school for a few years. And then we did homeschool from grade 6 to 9. And then we moved out to our farm, and then they went to the public school after that. But I remember driving into the Christian school once, and AC/DC Thunderstruck just blasting with my kids and my friends' kids in the car. And the one teacher was like, "You listen to this? Yeah, this is good music. I got to raise my kids right. They need to know what good music is." So there was, even back then, there was it started unraveling slowly.
Mm-hmm.
But when my mother-in-law started getting sick, my mother-in-law passed away of ALS about I want to say about 11 years ago now, when she became sick, that's when my deconstruction started. Like, that's what I know it really began, because this was a woman who was a gorgeous, gorgeous human. Like, not just physically, but like her heart was gorgeous. She was so full of compassion. She, she was so kind. I mean, she had a temper too, but we're human, like, and the doctrine of the church that someone who doesn't believe in Jesus, or that person would go to hell, that really, really, really bothered me then, because I'm like, this was the first person that I really knew closely that she wasn't a church person. She wasn't a follower. And it really sent me spiraling in some ways, starting to question my beliefs. And it was in that moment that I was like, you know what? If God is real and sends people like her to hell, he can kiss my ass. Because like, what is that? That's bullshit. That's not love. There's zero compassion there. It's just so devoid of anything that a human being needs. And so that is when it started, my deconstruction.
Wow, I'm so sorry that you lost her to ALS. It's just a terrible, terrible way to go. Terrible disease.
Yep. Yeah.
And this was Jesse's mom, your husband's
This was
mom.
Jesse's mom. Yeah.
So you had already been pulling on some threads, shall we say, of your religious belief system and allowing yourself, giving yourself some more freedom than other church members would be comfortable with. Was Jesse joining you on that journey, or were you guys talking about what was going on?
Not really. Like, I mean, not really, but not really. There was a point, and I can't quite remember when it was. I think that's when we moved out to the valley, where I just became a lot more comfortable in who I am, even though I still didn't really know who I was, and my role as a pastor's wife, and seeing some things that, like, hey, like that I don't really agree with that, and so I'm not. I mean, I'm not gonna. I would. Here's the easy way to say it. I lived outside the box when it came to being a pastor's wife. I pushed that limit, and I knew that I could push that limit, because I knew that the way I show up with people was through love, and it was through compassion. It's very far from perfect. Don't get me wrong, but I had a real strong justice streak in me that, like, let's not judge. And who cares if you throw an F-bomb now and again? Like, so I really tried to expand what that pastor's wife box was. And so it was just a natural thing to go from that. And when Trump got elected, I made a conscious decision, because I saw so much hypocrisy happening in the wider church, but also in our community church. And there was something that happened specifically to one of my kids that was the last straw. And so I made the conscious decision that, you know what, I have banked all of this equity in being a pastor's wife. I've served my community really well in many ways. I have, like, walked that line with lots of people and held space. Now it's time to spend every cent, because what I see happening in lots of areas of the church is rotten, and I don't want to have any more to do with it. And so that's when the gloves came off for me, and, like, let's not pretend this is truth. This is a country club. This is us getting together, patting ourselves on the back, and being all self-righteous. That's bullshit. Let's just say it how it is, right? And watching the evangelical church worship Trump just was like, oh my gosh, this is the most distasteful thing anybody who claims to believe in a God or love could do. Yeah.
Mhm. Yep, that's been a point for a lot of people to hasten their exit from the pews,
Yeah.
as they say.
Yeah.
Wow. So let me just think a little bit on some of what you said. Yeah, the gloves came off. Even going back further in the conversation, when you mentioned that music is your life, I feel that I know this to be true because one of the things that I loved watching on Twitter was you and Jesse doing your dance parties. And
Yeah.
you'd put on some different costumes and turn up some tunes and just live stream you guys doing so much fun, crazy dancing, just having fun to
Yeah.
that secular music that was part of your teenagehood. And that there is something so liberating about that. And I certainly recognized that in my journey as well, when I finally was able to say, I'm not just going to listen to scripture anymore, because it was only scripture, memory songs, no instruments, this sort of thing, but to get back to my own love of music. And I started singing in bands again and playing in bands locally.
Awesome.
And it was so different from serving on worship team, standing up at the front, trying to be as still as possible so no one would really look at me, they would only see Jesus, to getting to a point where I thought, well, if Jesus was real, I bet he actually liked some good tunes. Like, I don't think he'd have a problem with it.
I'm sure he loved Aerosmith.
Yeah. So that I can relate to that part of your journey as well. And so how did it go then, being married to a pastor and you just now removing the filter and saying, you know what, I'm going to tell you exactly what I see and what I've experienced and why I don't want to be a part of your club anymore. I mean, I'm sure that caused strife.
Oh yeah. No, there was like when COVID happened and we called them our Corona dance videos, that was my idea of, because we were all in lockdown when we started doing those. That was my idea of like sending out some love into the world. Like, hey, look at it. We're being silly here. Like, no shame. Like, why not dance around? Like, come do it with us. Let's, just
Have
10
fun.
minutes on a Friday night. Like, and we got in some trouble for that from the sister churches community. And the gossip that started going around about me at the time was not funny, because it was very unsettling at how fast gossip can spread. And then experiencing shunning from some people in the church. Myself, not my husband, because he was still very much being a pastor. Like, he didn't speak out. He was very careful not to even like any of my Facebook posts that I would post, because that could cause trouble. And at the time I did not have my Twitter and my Facebook combined at all. Like, I kept those two very separate. And because I didn't want church people coming to a space where I'm growing in leaps and bounds and expressing myself, to judge me for even more things. And so I kept those separate for most of the time, actually. But for my husband and I, like, it wasn't easy sometimes. Like, it wasn't easy, but we learned how to respect each other more. And I think that was the gift of it, was that our communication has improved in a lot of ways. And that came through a lot of disagreement and really struggling to find out who we are now, because I had shifted so much that I can only imagine how traumatic that would have been for him, inside of him. and he still had to deal with the community, still preach in church, still walk out his faith, because he's still a pastor, right? And when I made the decision to remove my membership, I stopped going to church. That was hard on him. That was really hard on him, and we had to learn how to walk in such a way that we can honor each other and find that level of empathy and validation for each other's experience, knowing that we don't have to be a right or wrong. This is our experience. And boy, did we screw it up a lot. Like, we had a lot of really hard days. And I mean, now it's way better. Like, we're different people now, and we have such a deep understanding of what it means to hold space with people and to walk beside them and to allow people freedom to be who they are. And in some of that is what I've learned, like, just philosophically, and theologically, whatever the word might be, but like, because I don't really subscribe to any faith anymore. Like, I wouldn't go as far as calling myself an atheist, but I'm definitely more agnostic in that I don't have to put a label on what the divine is or could be. And in many ways, I think the labels that we use in language, we're trying to communicate the same thing. And we're trying to reach for the same thing. We're just labeling it all these different things. And so I'm learning to look beyond the labels, to look at what's the energy underneath. And more often than not, people just want to connect. People just want to be seen. And people want to know that they're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would you say that you folks have managed to make the shift from shared beliefs to shared values, so that your focus is more on the values that you share rather than the beliefs that you share? Because that's such a paramount thing, that it's a shift that needs to happen when there's a change in faith in a partnership, either where someone converts or someone deconverts. And it's a scary time, because there are questions as to whether the relationship can survive. And how was it with your sons when you were going through this process yourself?
Yeah, I think for them, I mean, I can't really speak for them in that respect, because I don't think that they've often shared, what their experience kind of was, because we went from being really fundamentalist, and I was the disciplinarian, to, later in their teenage years, I'm just like, I am not kidding when I say this. When they turned 13, my parenting motto became, look, whatever you do, just don't be an asshole. Do whatever you want. Just don't be an asshole. And that became my parenting mantra. And so for them, I can imagine that there's a lot to unpack, and there will be a lot to unpack for years to come for them. But I talk pretty openly with them, and we have a really good relationship where we can just freely talk back and forth. We don't agree on everything, definitely. Like, they still hold some beliefs, conservative type beliefs, that I don't. And we found a way to listen. And that's the key. That's really the key with connection and relationships, is that key to listen and really enter into someone else's experience and thoughts, and why, like why they might think those things, or where does that come from, or like learning to ask more questions. And so my kids are only 22 and 24. And they're great communicators. And I can say they're really glad that we ditched the evangelical music.
No kidding.
Yeah, because I do say I raised them on rock and roll, and I think that was good.
And your husband still is part of the church, still even potentially in leadership at the church. Has there been intense pressure on him, or for what you can tell, things have kind of leveled out, and people are there to hear him and learn from him, and you don't really factor into that?
Yeah, I don't factor in at all anymore. I've made a couple appearances in church over the last just year. Like I stayed away for a couple years there, but and he's still very much pastoring there. It's just part-time, it's going to be less even. It's not something he wants to do forever. So he's mechanicking on the side. He has his own business, organic mechanic, at our house here in his shop. And he's well respected in the church. He's an Enneagram 9. He knows how to bring peace and harmony. He sees all sides to things. He is a really good leader. Like he knows how to bring people back to perspective in his church teams. So yeah, people love him. People love him in the community.
Nice. He sounds the opposite of a fundamentalist.
Yeah, he's not a fundamentalist at all. No, I wouldn't even. He's not evangelical, but he pastors an evangelical church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how did your interest arise in internal family systems?
So that was through Twitter. Actually, Twitter became an avenue where I've experienced so much growth because I was exposed to so many different people and ideas. And I would find someone on Twitter that they're ex-evangelical, so I'd follow them, and then I found this guy,
Mike. Is it Mike?
Phillips.
Yay!
It's Mike. And finding out he was a pastor and listening to his story and his journey, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like, there's so much knowledge here. And then he's the one who introduced me to IFS, and it's like IFS has like blown my world apart in so many good ways. And it's been the thing that I've been able to bring, like, all the religious sensation that I had in the past to an understanding of why that was, why I needed it then, and how it's grown till now, to understanding like a good solid sense, an internal sense of self is so important.
Right.
And I had moments of understanding that along the way where I could just never fully give myself up to church in that way. But since discovering IFS and doing mentoring with Mike now, the breadth and depth of understanding through such a simple system is profound. Like, it's actually profound. And it's the thing that's helped me see that in other religions and other societies, that it common across humanity, we all just want the same thing. And we just have different parts that are activated through trauma. My whole idea of sin, I don't believe in sin anymore. I call it trauma, that we often behave and act out of these roots of trauma. And it's the thing that brought me into religion was trauma. And throughout, I was traumatized. And it wasn't until leaving and finding that freedom, because gosh, that freedom when you no longer believe that you're going to be punished for every bad thought, or every, like, not even bad thought, but just inappropriate thought, the purity culture, the idea of hell. When you release that, infilling and the room you have for healing is incredible, because that is what happens when you release all the fear that drives you to religion, that drives you to needing all those rules and boxes. When you release that, there's this infilling of love, this infilling of like, what does it mean to be a human who thrives instead of survives? Like, that's where I'm right now. Like, I want to thrive. I don't just want to survive. And I feel like for me, that's what religion was the whole time, was just surviving. I'm just surviving. And I'm like, no, I can thrive. I don't need an external like source to tell me how to be good. Like, I just don't need that. And I don't understand anymore the idea that if we didn't believe in God, then we'd just be this godless, murdering, chaotic, anarchist people. I mean, for sure, there'd be lots of people like that because of trauma. But I don't need someone to tell me not to hurt someone. I know that it's bad to hurt someone. Like, yeah.
Well, my understanding of IFS, or internal family systems, or maybe some of our listeners have heard the phrase parts. It's parts work. The idea being, we develop certain coping mechanisms in childhood and maybe throughout life. And those, I mean, hooray that was able to save us in a very terrible time, when you're a child and you're limited in the power that you have and what you can do to escape. You might not be able to run away, but you might learn to dissociate and get away in your mind or whatever else is there. And so parts work with IFS seems like the most compassionate way for us to view those different parts, or those coping mechanisms that we've developed. Is that, how would you explain it?
Yeah, 100%. Like, first of all, just having the knowledge that we have parts. Like, I remember first learning about that and having days where I'm like really overwhelmed with like the grief of deconstruction and the fear and because for a good 2 years there, it felt like I had no solid ground, that I was just free falling because there was so much gossip and people were just being dumb around, like people who I thought were friends. So recognizing that, okay, wait a minute, there's this space between who you are as a person and your emotions and these parts. And for most people, you're like glued together like this. But IFS creates this space where now the core self, can operate in such a way where it's not being blanketed with parts and blended with parts. And then we can interact with those parts inside of us and hear what their burden is and help them and unburden them and validate them in the job they were trying to do. Because my goodness, our systems are just trying to protect us. All the parts we have, even the parts that we're ashamed of, like shame itself is a part, even the parts that we think are bad, they have jobs that they're just trying to protect us. And they're just going about it in a harmful way. And so we have to help them get back on track to do what they were originally meant to do before trauma entered in. But that teaching yourself to listen to your parts, because we often have these parts that we just ignore and we stuff them down and we just, we medicate them with alcohol and drugs and those are parts too. Those are firefighters. Like, so this whole complex system is just trying to protect you. And it lost confidence in core self when it was traumatized, because then the self didn't know how to stand up for itself. It didn't know how to protect itself in those moments. And so these other parts are created then.
Yeah. Wow. So it really is the most compassionate way that I've come across um, of looking at the self. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited that you came into contact with Mike, and he will be a guest coming up on the Divorcing Religion podcast soon as
Cool.
well. So I'm really looking forward to that. And you and I didn't even have a chance yet to talk about sex and your sex life and how it's so different now and so exciting once we're able to kind of crawl out from under fundamentalism. And so maybe that'll be for
Yeah.
a future episode. We can chat about that.
Perfect.
And people
Perfect.
can find you on Twitter. What's your handle?
Mystic Kootenai Girl.
Mystic
And
Kootenai Girl. Mm-hmm.
Mystic Kootenai Girl, yeah. And then Marie Lerch on Facebook.
Wonderful.
And then there's my website, lovemaven.ca.
Oh, excellent. I'm so happy for you, my friend. Your journey has been a really interesting one, and I'm glad you're doing this work to help other people. And I look forward to maybe getting to meet you in person later this summer. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Janice. You too. You too. This was awesome.
Oh, good. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I'm sure that you enjoyed my chat with Marie Lerch as much as I did. And I want to remind you that if you're looking for one-on-one religious recovery consulting, you can certainly come to my website, reach out to me. Divorcing-religion.com is my website. Also want to remind you to get your tickets to this year's conference on religious trauma. It's happening in October, and I'll have links in the show notes. Take care, everyone. We'll see you again soon.